What's up, everybody? Sorry for the long couple-week gap. Wasn't my intention. A lot of exciting things have actually happened in the last few weeks, especially after that last podcast episode that Alex and I had on budgeting. Couldn't believe the response we had to that. It's like MSPs truly want to grow next year. If you didn't see the big announcement, go check out the announcement video over on the Empath channel. If you couldn't tell, I'm happy to announce I'm actually going to be joining the co-founding team over at Empath with my really good friends Alex and Wes. 100% geared towards growing the education and the managed service industry. And it's super exciting and humbling to me because 1, Wes is a juggernaut. 2, Alex knows how to grow companies. And 3, I love nothing more than you guys, right? It's just going to be so dang impactful to have true education that isn't funded by some big endpoint company, right? So anywho, I want to get to the topic of today's video because after that podcast episode with Alex and I, if you didn't check it out, go watch it. It's really impactful on setting a mindset for budgeting into next year. My new really good friend, Michael Marlowe, sent me an email and said, hey Kyle, how do I make this attainable? How do I make this accountable? And it messed with my head. So much that I had 2 calls with him because I was like, how do you have a conversation with growing leaders in the managed service space to where they can grow into their roles, but also be accountable to the growth of our companies? And you've seen it plenty of times before, right? The company has to grow in order for the leadership team to grow both financially and in their own careers. So I had to build out a model, a conversation tool, right? I'm obsessed with thinking about, we got to hear it, we got to see it, we got to touch it. So how could we build something in our managed service providers to where not only can I weigh in, but I can buy it? And that's going to be a pivotal part to this entire conversation. So, right, we're going to get all into it. I got a special tool for you guys to use to have conversations in your own company. So stay tuned to the end and I'll show you the link to get that. And other than that, roll the rad intro. All right, so let's jump right into it. If you guys want to know, this is actually the second time I'm recording this video. Bozo over here went and forgot to record the whiteboard. Yay! Okay, so anywho, I'm in the mood for some lo-fi hip hop today. Rad, can you spit something funky cool up for me? Yeah, that's a lot better. Now why? Because today we need to have our minds in it, right? We got to have something that encourages us to actually pay attention to a lot of data that I'm going to throw at you today. And keep in mind, guys, a lot of what's going to be covered today is really conversational tools to help your MSP's budget be attainable and accountable. So while we go through these tools, there's 100,000 different little variables that you will go through on your own financial analysis to build your budget. But hopefully in seeing some of these things, you can start to understand what a budget actually looks like. So we're going to go into a lot of this. I'm going to show a lot of data and we're going to have a lot of cool conversations. May also go a little bit long, but you know what? I'm not going to cheat you out of it. So just put up with it. So let's jump in. So if you remember back in the Mindset podcast episode that Alex and I had around budgeting, there were 5 pivotal questions that we asked you and we thought, hey, this is what's important to have in our mind in order to start having these conversations of what is our budget going to look like. So the first question, how much top line do we need to grow next year? Meaning we need direction and context on how much of what we're going to sell. Second, is there enough target market to reach that growth? Right? Simply put, do we have enough prospects to be customers in our niche or area with products that we sell? That was a little bit of a different one for a lot of you. Third, how much in sales and marketing will that take to get there? Right? All of these deals will require time to sell. So before we can analyze anything else, what will these deals cost us? Then we get to number 4, which is, do our current gross margins support that spend? And this is what I talked a lot about at my conversation at NextGen this week, which was as owners, as shareholders, do we want to take the haircut in spending money on our sales and marketing team to grow our top line revenue? Or do we need our operations team to increase the gross margins, to increase the cash that goes into sales and marketing to pay for that revenue growth, Or is it a combination of the two? A really fun conversation actually on that one. Maybe I'll do that video later. But number 5, does all of that get us to target share price or net income for the organization? Right? We got to keep things afloat. We got to keep cash in the business. We got to keep money in there to pay the bills, right? Engineers watching this, you don't want your paychecks to bounce. Not very fun. And at the end of the day, that's a lot of our ROIs as owners in order to know that our business is doing healthy, right? Go figure. So before going any further, if you still have not asked yourself or your shareholders those questions, go watch that podcast episode that Alex and I did because it's going to answer a lot of those questions. So please make sure to stay tuned to that. For those that have, welcome to part 2. So let's add some context.
Where's the beef?
All right, where's the beef? One of the most rookie moves in building your budget is to assume that any improvements are going to begin in month 1. And right, I see so often us as MSP owners, we think that magically next year's going to be better and we're going to go from 2 clients per quarter to 3 clients per quarter. But we forget that to get deals closed in January, right? If I'm going to 3 a quarter, that's 1 a month on average. I got to start in December to make that happen. And if we're trying to have some tax things that are new to budgeting, maybe we don't get our budget done till December, so strategy doesn't happen till January. That might not be a reasonable thing for our business. So let me explain a little bit. I'm going to go to a whiteboard and I'm going to explain how this tool that I built for you works. So if we look at this, right, and this is the same one I showed on the podcast, this is a very standard actual to budget report that you will use to manage your teams. Now, in managing this, why this is important is this allows us to understand what % of budget attainment have my leadership teams upheld for our organization. So this is an accountability tool ultimately. But to get here, right, I need to know what the budget is, and I got to be able to calculate where we are. So if you aren't even there in your business, spend some time next year fixing the books, making sure your close rates are happening really fast. And when I say close rate in financial terms, for those of you don't know, right, your books should have a standard day every month that they get complete. That's it. 5th of the month, 6th of the month, 7th of the month, right? If it's the 20th of the month, that's not enough time to change. So, right, work that process of what does it take to us to get fully closed by the 5th of the month. Let's continue. So what we then have to think of, right? We asked ourselves those questions of, hey, where does our top line need to be? Where does our bottom line need to be? How much is that going to cost us? So as a conversational tool, let's just take that age-old saying of how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. So if we do this, now we can say, okay, we know where we ended up this year. We know where we want to go next year because we're using very, very basic growth metrics, right? We know, hey, we want to grow 20% top line, 30% bottom line. Now we can start to reverse engineer everything that's in the middle based off of some very easy thought processes. And again, this is a conversational tool. This is not how you build a budget. So what we're able to do is go, okay, last year, right, we know we want to do 20%. What was our churn? Something you need to dissect and you need to be conservative on what you put in here. So if you're only at 1.5% churn, put 2% churn, put 2.5% churn. Because the last thing you want is your revenue growth to be on par and a bunch of clients walk out the door and all of a sudden your team now has morale defeat because they couldn't hit the budgets that actually end up paying intent their variable pay. So we need to have these things in our model. So, right, we can then go, okay, so we have our churn and we have then our multiple streams of revenue because as managed service providers, we're not true pure play in the sense of that's all we sell, right? We do a little VAR, we do a little professional services, we do a little resell. It's all good. There's nothing wrong with it, right? The only thing that becomes wrong with that is when we want to figure out our mix, which may go to some level of valuation of the organization. And honestly, if you aren't worried about selling your organization in the next 3 to 5 years, this step may just be let's increase our margins, right? Because as you've seen in my other video, your margins won't blend. Right here, our MSP margin is the single thing that will grow our margin the fastest, which is pivotal to growing our revenue stream. And you're going to see more of that in a second. So continue to talk about this just a little bit, right? Now I can look at what our mix is, what it was. We can have some direction and because this is Excel, right? I can easily go, hey, here's where we ended up last year in hardware resale. Here's what our churn will be if I'm going to go ahead and model this out. I know what our growth will be because, right, this is how we're going to split up our blended mix, which then gets us to a total year over year. Easy, right? Now we can just kind of start to have a perception of what our growth is going to look like. Now, in continuing this, right, we're able to go all the way down to our COGS. We're able to do this because they all have growth and churn. We're able to go to our gross profits and our gross margins. And then, right, for a lot of the conversations when it comes to scaling and growth, right, we could see how much sales and marketing we're going to. Now, if you see, you've got 240% here. Whoa, what the hell? Why is this here? Again, conversation tool. So this helps us educate in this type of video content method. Now, if you look here and I go back to the whiteboard, we'll see that even our expenses, this SG&A, our sales, good, and administrative fees, they also have growth and churn. Because as a business, I know it takes money to make money. So right in this chart, which is super awesome, is now I'm able to build a very simple perspective on what the change is to look at kind of how my fees will start to split. Now, for most of us, right, this is where a lot of people stop. And I don't want you to stop here. This is where you actually can get into a little bit of a trap. And what is that trap? So it's obvious that MSPs want to improve, and that's fantastic, right? You gotta hustle, we gotta get an ROI on our business, that entrepreneurial spirit, and we gotta have a team that wants to grow with us. And again, engineers that are watching this, you work for a small business. If that company doesn't succeed, you don't succeed. So we need to keep this in mind. But here's the rookie mistake. Rather than a gradual increase in margin and spend, what we do as providers in the first time that we budget, and this is, if you take one thing away from this call, this is the thing you need to know. We do a cyclical analysis on what this growth looks like. Meaning, if our net margin is 13%, we just say we expect 13% every single month of next year. We divide by 12. And that becomes a trap because then our teams are constrained in how they spend their budget and they can't add any strategy. We should probably break that down a little bit, right? What does Kyle mean about this cyclical analysis? Say you're a young leader and in month one, well, there's two things that maybe you're thinking about how I'm going to perform this business. Number one, right? Maybe they do a rookie mistake. They spend their maximum budget right off the bat since they have it. I see a lot of this happen actually in education and in training because, hey, I'm just going to go sign up for a certification course for all my engineers. And while they're all strong in that one aspect, they're weak in some other aspect because you can't predict all the stuff that you need to learn and you need to grow into next year. Or number two, where they struggle is to increase their margins in month one. What do you mean? So in this model, right, say this gross profit, this gross margin perspective, 36 to 39%. Well, say if last year we performed at 34% and we say, you have to perform at 39% every single month now because we thought cyclically, right? We divided by 12. We just did an average. Well, there's no way you're going to go from 32 to 39 in a single month. And honestly, you guys as MSPs, you know this. We've been talking operational maturity for so long. You're going to spend 2, 3, 4, hell, Sierra Pacific Group, when I was running that ship, it would take you 12 to 18 months. So we got to think in terms of there's going to be baby steps. However, with laws of average, spoiler alert here, right? I might need to go over 39% through that investment to average 39% in a year. And we're going to keep going, right? So we want to figure now, resulting in maximum spend at minimum efficiencies is depleting your bottom line and possibly netting a loss. I'm broke! Now, this is dangerous. And the obvious reason is that we have maximum investment without sales and then missed expectations. And this will be demoralizing to you and your team because, well, you're going to start the year off in the hole. And if you're not prepared for it, or if you don't strategize for it, then you're going to sit there, you're going to pull back the reins, you're going to hit the eject button, you're going to lay out the safety net, and then your whole plan is out the window. You're never going to catch up. So there's going to be some uncomfortability that has to happen. So how do we prevent this? Now, this is critical and ultimately why your budgeting cycle and annual strategic planning meetings are so important, as we need to weigh in and buy in. Now, for a lot of us that are growing, or a lot of us that are tenured, not having say in the conversation is going to be defeating. And we've all been there. Honestly, a lot of you business owners, you started your business because you didn't want to have a boss anymore. You didn't want anyone telling you what to do. So we need to have this ability to have these conversations over 2 or 3 months to say, hey, does everyone like the P&L? Does everyone like the budget? Does everyone think that they are going to be able to succeed, right? We don't want to make this so attainable that it's easy, right? We want that stretch. We want to do a little bit better than next year. So that's where the shareholder conversation in the video that Alex and I had was so important. And as you all know, if you're on a leadership team, it's time to act your wage, as this is where the cream rises to the top.
The cream of the crop!
Exactly, right? We have to understand that if I accept a leadership position, I am leading a team that betters the company. We cannot forget that, guys. It is not about the technology. It is about the business. It is about your customers. It is about your employees making fair wages. If we don't concentrate on this, they will never make fair wages. And we need to understand where those bottlenecks lie. So let's get back to the whiteboard, as it's time to eat that elephant. So we're engineers, people, and one of the easiest techniques to prevent this cyclical analysis is let's cut our goal in half and review seasonality in our business, and let's have a conversation on what just dividing by 2, not 12, starts to ask some questions. So as my buddy Alex explained, right, we got to pull the string from both ends. Looking like I'm milking a cow right now. So let's cut this annual budget into a semi-annual budget, and we're going to have some fun conversations, right? So here I've done on the whiteboard where, right, we have our budget FY24, and we know that we're going to grow to about 2.2 million, and we want about 15% on the bottom line. Let's use our heads. Let's use our brains. What questions do we ask? Well, let's start just easy. Do we think in our business that we are going to have more revenue at the beginning of the year or more revenue at the end of the year? And you can have dialogue around this. Have your sales guy talk to you about, hey, what are your close cycles? Is it 90 days, 75 days, 120 days? How many leads do you have right now? How many of them are proposal delivered stage, right? You get to have these conversations of, do we have enough in the hopper to close a bunch in Q1? If we don't, then no, we're not going to have more revenue in the first half than the second half, right? Because as we sell managed service contracts, our revenue grows. How? What do you mean the revenue grows? Well, right, if we say we're selling 2 contracts a quarter, right, 8 in a year, then they're each going to be $1,000 per month, right? So that there is $6,000 per quarter of MRR. So Q1 6, Q2 12, right? Because we're adding them in that cycle, and they pay month over month. And then we have 18 and 24. So even if we start to sell more clients in this year, we're going to have more revenue in the second half. Cool. So that mix, just in this example, none of these numbers are accurate, just conversation, right? About 4852, which comes out to this 1,063, way too many arrows on this star, I guess, in 1.1 million. Now, our gross margin is interesting as well, because right now we have this conversation. Actually, I'm going to erase some of these real quick so we can make sure we're all following along. We're all dandy. We're all learning here. I'm a dork. Back to the show. So right now we get to say, okay, well, gross margin. What does that look like? Let's bring our ops guy in. Let's have a conversation. Hey, you were 32% last year. With our current budget, because we need to hire more sales reps, right? We talked number 2 question. Is this sales percentage, right? Last year we spent, I'm going to change this conversation, guys. Broke my own rule. Let's talk about the sales and marketing expense first. So we're going to sell more contracts this year. That means we probably need to understand how many leads that is, how many first-time appointments, how many proposals delivered, and of those proposals delivered, how many are going to close. Now, our sales team, they only got 40 hours in a week. Yeah, they're variable pay, but you simply do not have enough bodies to make enough calls, right? When your average MSP that's growing consistently 20-25% in their MSP revenue year over year, they have to make 250 to 300 activities per week. That takes time. That's a lot of doors slammed in your face. That's just part of building an engine, putting fuel into the tank, guys. So, if I spent, let's say, 3%, last year, if I go to FY23 performance and I was able to go, hey, last year our sales and marketing, was only about 3%. So that was only enough to close 4 contracts. If I want to close 8 contracts, I got to double that. And I'm not growing my top line double, It's on 100% year. So I need to pay for it somehow. Again, go into that conversation. Do I take the haircut or do we pay for it a little bit? So in that, you can see that year over year, we're going to spend 6% in sales and marketing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation of, to make all those calls, to build all those first time appointments, knowing that it takes us 120 days to close an MSP contract. I'm probably going to spend more of my sales and marketing budget in the first half than the second half, because by the end of the second half, or right around the middle of it, I've got enough first time appointments, enough matured clients or prospects at that point that I should be closing those deals without having to spend too much. So right off the bat, 60-40, I'm now able to see that I spent 7%, 4%. This is percentage of revenue. The averages balance out to where year over year, I'm still only spending 6%. So this goes again into where the dangers of that cyclical thinking can happen, because I might need to spend more money. Now, I want to take just a pause here, because one thing that Michael pointed out to me is, well, Kyle, maybe they can't think this way. Maybe these conversations aren't happening. So this is why this conversation tool is so important, because it allows us to identify if the leadership team is truly being the leadership team, They're being strategic. They're thinking ahead, They're thinking 1, 2, 3 quarters going, I think this is reasonable. Here's a couple ideas I have. Here's a couple things I want to try. Here's a couple things that we did last year that just didn't work. Those are so important. And I'll be honest, if your team is not asking you those questions, they're not acting their wage, or I hate to say it, they might need training and mentorship to get there, or they may not be the right person. And that's tough, That becomes Kyle, how do I hold people accountable? That's got to be your own stomach. I completely get the position that you're in, but we also don't want to just spin our wheels hoping for change, That's the definition of insanity, just trying the same thing over and over and over again. So if I know that my sales team can't figure this out, but I do like them, I want to invest in them, Sales coaching is going to be a pivotal conversation if you don't have the ability to coach them. Now we know how our sales and marketing is going to play out, which means now we need to talk gross margin. Because as an owner, I don't want to pay for that extra 3%. I don't want to just take it off the bottom line. So we need to be able to say, if we expect this year 30%, as we had a previous conversation of, then I'm going to have to mature my services, which means that in the first half, I can commit to 38%, and in the second half to 40% to have a 39% average. So now we're still having this conversation, and what's cool about this is now we have an integrative business model to where our sales team wins when our ops team wins, and our ops team wins when our sales team wins. Now we're working in harmony. And going back to churn, some of the important conversations we may need to have, we might need a customer or two to walk out the door. We might want to suggest to them, hey, Mr. Customer, it's been a great relationship. Your margin's been in the tank for the last year and a half. And for me to grow, I just can't have you around, You're in that 10% margin or 0% margin, or I'm paying them to be my customer. So I might need to have more churn this year to just balance out my revenue streams. So, all of these conversations can happen. This is what's exciting, is we all in a room, we're all talking about this year, we're all talking about the sacrifices and growth that we need to achieve, and we're weighing in. Now, G&A is a little bit more flexible because in your business, a lot of these expenses stretch pretty far, When it comes to taxes, when it comes to rent, when it comes to a lot of those little nitpicky things like your accounting fees and all that other stuff, they don't really change too much at scale. Yeah, they do increase, but not from a percentage perspective. They do go down a little bit, just don't worry about them too much. So cyclical thinking is okay here. In this particular model, I figured, hey, let's do a little bit of an improvement, right? So let's go from 18% to 17%. Maybe we call a couple vendors that we're not using their stuff for and cancel the contracts, right? Maybe we shut the lights off at night, shut some computers down. Who cares, right? Like, don't worry about it too much. Now, here's what's extremely important with this. You listening? Look at this. Net margin in the first half is 11%. Now, in a conversation about our next year's strategy, this is extremely important because if we don't have an agreement as a team, and I finished 15% last year, and in my first half, I finished at 11%, that might be antagonizing enough for me as an owner to completely pull back, hit the eject button, say, everybody stop what you're doing, stop spending, right? Like it might make you panic. It might make you have these vulnerable impulses. But if it's a part of the plan, then it's expected, right? If you go back to my video on resilience, this allows me to not have a cortisol effect to where we can go, cool, I totally expected this, right? This allows you then as leaders to have the freedom to where the owner isn't sitting there sticking their nose where it doesn't belong, right? This is a way to subjectively say, yeah, we expected this. This is to budget. I'm still 100% to budget with 11% on the bottom line. Now, with that being said, right, we have to double our efforts because sales and marketing, right, 60-40, they're spending less in the second half, right? We're going to still have an average to where the bottom line is going to be fine at the end of the year, right? We got out of the cyclical thinking. We got into the strategic thinking to our budgets now being a little bit more attainable. Now, what's awesome about this, and right, let's talk about net profit a little bit, is depending on your strategy, and sometimes going against the zeitgeist, right? There is going to be a real zero, as I like to call it, especially for you owners that take distributions rather than salary. Because now, for those of you that aren't owners, basically what that means is sometimes as owners, we take our pay, our salary from this bottom line. Now, there's a million reasons on why that happens. Let's not get into that today. But that insecurity sometimes happens because maybe of that 15%, 6% is my salary. So, right, we need to have a thought on what is our real zero. Because if I am paying myself this way with fixed distributions, and I want to value my business because maybe I do want to sell, I do want to generate enough cash to take some debt on, right? This bottom line goes into what's called an adjusted EBITDA or adjusted net income because it goes right back into your expenses when they go value your company. So, right, if I'm going, I want 15%, and I'm paying myself through distributions because 15% in my area with my comps gets me the awesome multiple, then I might actually need 21%. So, right, this goes into that strategy. Now, you're not going to go from 15 to 21% in a single year. You have that hockey stick and someone like me goes in and helps with the due diligence. I'm going to point it out right away and say, I found the smoking gun. They're really not that profitable. They fired people, they cut costs, they jacked their client rates, whatever, right? We don't want to see that. We want to see nice, even lines. Nice and even, nice and smooth, because that shows maturity, right? Maturity of what I'm buying means that I can get the return on my investment of acquiring your company. It's not all about acquisition, but I just felt like that was to be said. So once you start to decide this first half, the second half, right? You have your conversations with your leadership team, right? We've all gone through and said, hey, all of these mixes look fine. Now, we could stop here, completely stop, right? We could say, you know what, right now, we have enough to go off of. We have enough to say, hey, let's just take these halves, divide it by 6, and we'll be completely fine. And you know what? For a lot of you, this is still going to be drastically better than what you've done in the past. Now, if you need to dive deeper, right, you can simply take some of your MRR goals, divide it up, average it, figure out an ARR price, right? We still need to think in our mind, are these reasonable, right? Is, for example, 7%, which now because we built a cool little calculator, I can tell you, I can go in my P&L tool and I can say, that's 83,000 in the first half, 55 in the second half. Maybe I hired a lead gen agency to ramp all of my first time appointments in the first half. Does that buy me the clients to meet my revenue goal? So you're going to have to do a little assumptive here, right? Like this is where now in the first opportunity that you have, you can check your gut if 20% is even in the cards for you, right? I can go, if my customer acquisition cost is, let's say 25,000, which is national average for MSPs, and I want to close 8 logos, well, 25 times 8 is 200K. That's not enough. Do I back off my growth goals? Do I take a haircut? Do I invest in some efficiencies? Right? There's no snake oil. When it comes to growth of your customers, and this is what we talked about in the panel at NextGen, was it is an activity-based business. Now, a lot of this isn't exact math, right? It's going to allow you to have that gut feel of, are you being realistic? Is this attainable, right? This is the key first part of accountability, is if it's not attainable, then let's be real. Let's reduce it to 18%, 16%, 15%, whatever gets you growing, whatever gets you maturing. Because if that falls to 0, let's say 10%, right? You don't want to hover around that 12, 11% because you're truly only making 1% profit. That's not good. That's danger, Will Robinson, right? Or are you just setting, and you don't want to set your sales leaders up for failure because then they're just going to walk out the door because they're also not getting their commission. But if it is required, then unfortunately, maybe they're also not the right sales leader.
You're fired.
Or you may realize you do not have a process to produce that fruit. So the first quarter may require staffing or ramp ups that may make a second tough quarter now, right? And let's get into the quarterly breakdown a little bit. So just like we did it, say we want to mature even more, right? We go, hey, we've got our first half, we've got our second half. We're happy with all of this. It's exactly what we like, but we want to go one step further to have more conversation. Divide the quarters by 2. Now we have another conversation. And just like we did with Slit going into a semi-annual year, right? I can focus on these and go, cool. In that first half, if I'm going to be spending a lot of sales and marketing up front to get those leads in, to get those first-time appointments, to get the proposals out the door, to make sure we got abundance of them in Q3, maybe some of those first-time appointments also told us they're in contract into the second half, right? We've got all this stuff going. It's super exciting. Do I spend more in Q1 or Q2? What does that look like? What does that do? Right? So now, just like the first time, hey, I am going to spend more in Q1, right? I'm going to do a blitz. I'm going to bring on a couple BDRs. We're going to make 300 calls a week each, and we're just going to fill the funnel. Just fill it. We'll worry about the rest later. However, that does mean that, our revenue is going to be more quarter 2 heavy. Maybe if my expectation was 2 clients per quarter, 4 in the first half, well, maybe I end up only closing 1 in the first quarter and 3 in the second, right? And that's that flexibility that sales manager should be communicating to you. You may realize that you don't have the process to produce that fruit. So, right, so that first quarter may require staffing or ramp ups or operational investment, right? Bring in a sales coach, talk to them, pump them up, get them going, get them making phone calls, knocking on doors, sending LinkedIn messages, all that crap. But again, we got to be realistic. Now, your service team, right? This is similar. Conversations on how long would it take to ramp up margin efficiencies, price increases to get that net margin to happen, right? Because we're not going to just do it simply. Now, because we're modeling this out, right? And things like churn are unpredictable at times, right? We might need to be a little more aggressive. This might mean recruiting early, which drops our margins, right? This might mean that the consultants need some systems to improve, right? They may need to go to a course on their PSA or their RMM tool and their scripting and all that fun stuff that we do love. This becomes a justification for that. However, I need an ROI. Probably the first time you've thought of it this way. If I send them to training, I got to make money on it. How do I make money? How do I track it? How do I make it accountable? I think you guys are catching on. So gross margin for this sales team in this particular conversation, 37, 38, 39, and 40. They have a nice gradual, right, smooth line that gets them to this point. And now the conversation with your service manager becomes a little bit more two-sided, right? They're not looking at this as unreasonable. They're just thinking about, how am I going to do it, right? That old Dan Sullivan, who, not how, really becomes true in this one, because from 37 to 40% in an entire year, now we're talking. Now we're cooking with peanut oil. right? And those all require time. So it makes it an easy conversation. And bear in mind, it'll be bumpy, We're changing the tires while driving. And as our sales teams, right, they're going to be bringing in new clients before we reach maximum efficiencies, right? Go watch my video on the MSP secret, as you have to do that this way, guys. Don't ever stop developing your client list. Never hit the brakes while we go increase gross margin, because you're just going to take a hit on the bottom line as we've modeled out here. So hopefully I've completely rid you of that thought process by this point. Let's keep going. But this also, guys, means that we will have a large increase in gross profit to utilize in our sales teams. So owners, you have to make now a decision, right? We either can dip into the net profit to bring on the sales team early, or have lower expectations on revenue growth results in that first half due to a constrained budget. So all of these things come into play because now, right, we're seeing, right, we thought in the first half, an 11% gross margin, or net margin, excuse me, would pump the brakes. Well, what about when that first quarter it's at 9%? And my zero, that real zero, was like 6%, 7%, maybe it was 9%. We didn't make money the first quarter. That can be terrifying. This is why sometimes zooming in too far or too wide can be dangerous. Cyclical thinking can be dangerous. But if it's part of the plan, I've built resilience, I've built a callus, I'm not going to have a cortisol effect. I expect it. So I can tell you right now, as a shareholder, I'll be all good by the end of the year. Now, going into the conversation that Michael and I had, real heavily, this is where that whole idea of, is this going to truly be our annual goal? This is the first time. Now, you may have cold feet, right? You might sit there going, I don't know if I want to do this. Do I want to put my own salary at stake? Does my service team, do I have enough confidence that they're going to do this? And that's the right time to ask this, right? When you see, hey, 25, 30%, right? Most of my clients want to do 30%. They are owners that are willing to grow to that at all costs. So it's tough, right? How much of a haircut are you willing to take in the first round? Do you have a family? You got things you got to pay for? Do you got debt? It's serious things to take into consideration. And this just uses, right, this 4-6 month process to break down, right, is this a good attainment of our goals?
God damn it, Tom! You're a goddamn genius!
So, right, we've created these expectations for our teams. First half, second half, first quarter, third quarter, it's all in there. So, right, it's no stretch of the imagination when we roll this forward, going into Q3 and Q4, we have that inverse performance netting with the least amount of deals in Q4, with the maximum profitability. And due to averages, right, we got beyond 40%, and that's going to start you off real good in the year after, right? Now we're really able to do some growth if we've ramped this up and we can maintain it. But as you can see, right, those shareholders, they still get their net performance, right? We talked about this, right? Now I'm repeating myself because I want to get it through that, right? Those shareholders still get their net performance in this model, even though they took it on the chin the first few rounds. Well, damn, right? We have a budget, guys, right? It's 4 quarters broken out with some strategy and leadership buy-in because, hey, I got to say, boss, maybe we make it a little bit different. Maybe can I spend a little bit more? Can you increase my budget a little bit more so I can get that one extra tool, that one extra rep, right? I can buy a list. I can go and sponsor a Chambers event or something. Now, obviously, we are going to want to do this 12 months over. And now, if this is your first year, I honestly don't recommend going deep into the month over month, as you simply need this just to get used to macro managing your business. You're not at a place to hold your team accountable month over month just yet, right? This is going to take some cycles, right? For those of you that are in some type of business operating system, this is perfect because now I can create rocks that actually meet our business objectives, right? Rocks that are actually accountable. Who would have thought, right? A little bit different than what you're normally told. And for you, right, it just takes that quarter to normalize it a bit at times, right? Looking at things month over month can make you too knee-jerky, especially if you're gonna have quarters that you're gonna hit lower profits than you've ever hit before. So it might just, that ignorance is bliss might be a decent strategy. And for those of you that feel that you are ready month over month, this is where you're really going back to the whiteboard, right? You're going to have a real detailed sheet. You're going to have your numbers in check. We're going to be breaking this out. really looking at this going, okay, where do we see some growth? Where do we see some churn? Where do we see some seasonality? Maybe in a quarter, like a summer quarter, real good at the beginning of the quarter, real shit at the end of the quarter because everyone goes on vacation and no one picks up the damn phone, right? All of these things can start to be discussed, right? This is where a CFO is going to own a lot of the like, hey, this is when we pay taxes. Here's when we amortize that payment, right? And you're going to introduce those extra things to where reality kicks in, right? Maybe I can't achieve this growth because of some debt we took on or how one of our clients pays for their contracts. Those all start to exist there. By the way, this is also to where accrual bookkeeping becomes extremely important. And this just doesn't mean you run your reports as accrual in QuickBooks. This means you truly do deferred revenue practices and deferred cost practices to make sure everything lines up month over month. If you're not doing that, whole other conversation altogether. And this video would be way too long, by the way, if we dove into this month over month. But I'm going to assume I have gotten to the majority of you at this point to where now you have some strategy. How do we have this conversation? How do we make this attainable? So where do we go from here, right? A month over month budget breaks down what your leadership team will need to carry out for your MSP to win. It's the map to victory. So we have our budget and we need to get that to your bookkeeper to put it into your ledger as we need to make this accountable, right? Just like that whiteboard where I showed you guys twice now, right? I have this actual to budget report where this budget attainment, this thing right here, these percentages, this is ultimately the KPIs of a really good leadership team. Did you grow? Did you save? Did we win? That's it. It does get a little bit more complex than that, but right, for the purpose of a budget conversation, this is even to where some of their compensation comes into play. And in your ledger, you'll have the ability periodically to run this budget to variance reports showing you where you are or how you did. Those month to date, quarter to date, year to date reports are very powerful for your leadership team, which means they need to be able to get these reports. So if you're not vulnerable enough or comfortable enough with them seeing the books yet, right, budgeting might not be right for you right now. And with our leadership teams having been involved in building this, they will need to use this at the leadership level to understand how they are doing. However, this is also their explicit permission to make changes in their business units and create initiatives as they have justification. Meaning, for you as owners, you will have some level of vulnerability here as they may start spending or saving faster than you'd normally be comfortable with, right? They're swiping the credit card. You just need to manage this budget. This is your report, but it's this freedom that must come with performance. This is where accountability really kicks in. And for those of you that use these business operating systems, right, I suggest you create a modification in your schedules to review these reports monthly in the beginning when the books are closed with the whole team to discuss where we met expectations or missed them. And I'll be quite honest, we have a bunch of, as Stephen Covey calls them, rocks and projects that we're working on to mature our business, and sales aren't coming in, budgets are getting cut, people are getting fired, because that is how we have to react. That is how running a business is. And is it right? If they're not meeting expectations, right, we have to adjust our strategy to catch up or curb some spending if its investment is not creating the results that we expected. It just happens, guys. And as owners, having some floors and ceilings that give you permission to hit the eject button will help, as yes, it'll be uncomfortable, but you also don't want to lose so badly that you completely lose the year in the beginning. Eject. So have a conversation with yourself as an owner, right? If my real zero was 8 and they get to 9 or 7 or 6, when do I just hit the stop button? Now, as for accountability, it's in your quarterly leadership meetings. We will need to have the books closed for the quarter and review how we did. This is a reactive process, and our leadership members should know where they're going to end up, right? They will need to come prepared to speak how they achieved victory, come in excited. They're putting beers and drinks on the tables, right? We're going out to steak and everyone's happy. Or they need to say what they learned this quarter. And when they didn't achieve victory, they need to come prepared with the lessons learned, leading causes, right? That true post-mortem and the plan that they are prepared to take to make up for that poor performance. And for you owners, this is where you'll need to be prepared to hold them accountable. If they are not showing confidence or the ability to make up for the quarter, you'll need to decide if they need added training or if they are not the one to grow that business unit to tomorrow.
I don't think we should see each other.
Oh, that's okay.
What will be pivotal to learn from this as owners and strategists is this is a critical component to budgets, as they will either earn your leadership team great rewards or have you considering their replacement. I can tell you right now, I've been in conversations with my leadership team where I've had to tell them, hey, you're not getting your budgets this quarter because sales didn't bring enough leads in. So how are we going to fix that, Mr. Sales Leader? What do you need help from all of us? The floor is yours. We can't be shy of those conversations. So if you want to make the goals unobtainium, you're both setting a precedence in your culture that goes against accountability, but also putting their jobs on the line. So be prepared to make these attainable with a little bit of stretch. That was a lot on this one, guys. My only last comment on all this is if you're in your first year or two, make sure to keep this budget accountable, but also keep it locked in all year. Try your best to not change it, but just continue to review it. And right, this is where done is better than great. This is where done is better than perfect. Even though you're not coming close to those goals, try to catch up with it, right? What's it gonna take to do a little bit better? And develop plans to mature into these growth rates you are setting and see how your leadership team uses this as a tool. And when you're reviewing this with your team during your annual planning meeting, double check that everyone is bought in and that they understand the expectations. For those of you with business operating system, right, make your rocks around the budgets, right? We've kind of talked about that. I even used to put the budgets on the table and make everyone sign it saying, yeah, this is part of my expectations. This is part of my comp plan. I'm ready to go. But anywho, guys, I hope you're all having a great fourth quarter. I hope this had value for you. Leave comments, right? Give me a thumbs up, whatever it is. If you have any questions, maybe I'll make that topic on my next video. If you're going to be at IT Nation, by the way, make sure to come say hi, right? Like, I don't know where I'm going to be. I'll be running around. You guys know how to get a hold of me on LinkedIn. Let's chat. But anywho, guys, thank you as always. These videos are going to keep coming by day after day, week after week. Just because I'm on Empath now doesn't mean this channel is going to go away. Stay accountable, and I'll see you all later. Peace out.